In the quiet foothills of Altadena, California, a community once gathered around a place that stood as both a home and a symbol of history. It was the largest black-owned mansion in the area, a property that carried with it not only architectural grandeur but also the weight of legacy. Families spoke of it with pride, visitors admired its presence, and many saw it as a reminder of what could be built and preserved against the odds. But in one devastating night, that legacy faced an unimaginable test. A massive fire swept through, consuming walls that had once echoed with laughter, warmth, and determination. By the time the flames subsided, what remained was not just a charred structure, but a profound sense of loss, one that rippled through the community and far beyond. This wasn't simply the destruction of a building, it was the fading of a landmark that told a story of resilience. For generations, the mansion stood as a beacon of progress, a reflection of dreams realized in the face of countless challenges. It represented more than wealth, it represented triumph, belonging, and a shared sense of possibility. When the smoke cleared, many residents in Altadena were left to grapple with more than the wreckage. They were faced with a pressing question: how do we hold on to history when the physical reminders are taken away? In the wake of the fire, conversations grew louder about the importance of remembering, documenting, and protecting spaces tied to heritage. Community leaders, local historians, and everyday people began to reflect on how fragile legacies can be, and how vital it is to carry those stories forward. The tragedy reminds us of a larger truth: cultural landmarks are not just brick and wood, they are vessels of memory. When one disappears, it leaves behind both silence and a call to action. The mansion's story, though altered, now asks to be retold in new ways, ensuring that its significance endures in voices, in writing, and in the hearts of those who refuse to let history slip away. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, remembered, and shared, we invite you to be part of this journey. Like this video, share it with others who value history, and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories that keep legacies alive. Together, we can ensure that no piece of history, no matter how fragile, fades into the shadows. The mansion was more than a residence, it was a living monument, a place where history and hope intertwined in the heart of Altadena. To those who passed by its gates, it appeared as a stately home with elegant design and quiet strength. But for the community, it meant something far greater. It stood as a reminder that dreams, even the boldest ones, could be realized, and that progress was possible in a world that often made it difficult for such dreams to take root. The story of the mansion stretched beyond bricks and timber. It was woven into the lives of the people who built it, maintained it, and cherished it. Generations of black families in Altadena looked upon the mansion with pride, seeing in it a reflection of their own aspirations. It was not just about wealth, but about achievement, dignity, and belonging. In a community where history carried both triumphs and trials, the mansion became a symbol that whispered, "We are here. We endure. We create." Its walls held countless stories, celebrations of milestones, gatherings where voices rose in laughter, and quiet evenings where reflections of the past met the promise of the future. Every detail, from its architecture to its carefully tended grounds, spoke to resilience and vision. Visitors often left with a sense that they had touched something larger than life, something that connected them to a heritage both precious and powerful. For Altadena's black community, the mansion was never just a display of grandeur. It was a collective memory, a shared chapter in the book of perseverance. It offered proof that prosperity and cultural pride could coexist, even flourish, in a landscape that had not always welcomed such achievements. It reminded young people growing up nearby that they, too, could build, aspire, and leave behind something lasting. Beyond its immediate surroundings, the mansion carried a significance that resonated with broader history. It was a visible answer to a question often asked but rarely acknowledged: what does it look like when a community invests in its own future? The mansion's existence was the reply. It showed that legacy was not confined to museums or distant landmarks, it could be lived in, nurtured, and passed on. Its presence became part of Altadena's rhythm, a fixture that seemed eternal, as if it had always been there and always would be. The mansion offered comfort, pride, and a sense of place. It was proof of resilience in its most tangible form, embodying the values of persistence, vision, and hope that defined the community it served. Even as time passed and the world outside its gates shifted, the mansion remained steady. It stood as a witness to both everyday life and historic change, holding firm as generations came and went. Its legacy was not just its size or its beauty, but the story it told, a story of rising above, of shaping space and meaning, of holding on to identity in the face of impermanence. The mansion tied the past to the present, reminding Altadena that history is not something to be looked at from afar, but something to be lived and experienced daily. Its value lay not only in its structure but in the way it inspired conversations about heritage, community, and the paths forward. It was, in every sense, a place where memory and possibility intertwined. To remember this mansion is to honor more than a house. It is to honor a vision realized, a community strengthened, and a legacy that speaks to what is possible when hope is met with determination. Though the structure may no longer stand as it once did, its meaning endures, etched in memory, carried in stories, and alive in the spirit of a community that refuses to let its history fade. It was never just a home. To those who knew its story, the mansion was a vessel of meaning, a place that reached far beyond its walls. While families gathered within it, while life unfolded in its rooms, it quietly carried another purpose. It stood as a symbol of resilience and achievement, a testament to what the local black community in Altadena had built and what it had overcome. Every brick, every beam, every window seemed to whisper a story of persistence. This mansion represented a chapter in which determination shaped not only a dwelling but a dream fulfilled. To live there, or even to walk past its gates, was to witness proof that ambition could take root and flourish despite the many obstacles history had placed in its path. The community saw the mansion not simply as a structure but as an emblem of triumph. It was a reminder that success was not an abstract idea, it was real, it had weight, and it could be seen and touched. Young people looked at it with wide eyes, imagining what their own futures might hold. Elders spoke of it with reverence, their words carrying the weight of memory and the pride of survival. In its presence, residents found encouragement. For many, the mansion became a symbol of what could be achieved through perseverance, creativity, and vision. It was not only a place where life was lived but also a landmark that affirmed identity and possibility. To stand before it was to feel the quiet power of resilience transformed into beauty. Celebrations inside the mansion often echoed with more than joy, they carried the resonance of victory. Each gathering was a testament to the strength of a community that had long been told what it could not achieve. In this house, the narrative was different. Here, stories of struggle were met with stories of overcoming. Here, families toasted not just to the present moment but to the generations who had made such a moment possible. It was a place where heritage breathed. Its walls held the echoes of both hardship and triumph, reminding everyone who entered that greatness could rise from difficulty, and that every step forward was a collective accomplishment. The mansion spoke to more than individual success, it spoke to community resilience, to the ability to create spaces that reflected pride and perseverance. As the years passed, its significance deepened. What began as a residence grew into a cornerstone of cultural identity. The mansion stood tall, not just because of its design, but because of what it represented: stability, dignity, and the unshakable spirit of a people who had built more than a home, they had built a lasting statement. For those who came after, the mansion was a guiding star. It reminded them that even in the face of setbacks, progress could be made and preserved. It taught that achievement was not defined only by material wealth but by the stories of courage and determination woven into every success. The mansion embodied this lesson, visible to all who sought to learn from it. Though it no longer stands as it once did, its story continues to inspire. The mansion lives on as a symbol of resilience and achievement, carried in the hearts of those who remember it, retold in voices that refuse to let its meaning fade. It was never just a residence. It was a beacon, a reminder that dreams, no matter how difficult, are worth building, and that when they rise, they lift a community with them. It began quietly, almost unnoticed at first, a glow in the night, faint and unassuming. But within moments, the glow grew into something fierce, something unstoppable. The fire moved with a terrifying speed, wrapping itself around the mansion as if determined to erase it. Flames licked at the walls, devouring wood and paint, reaching higher with every breath of wind. The air thickened with smoke, and the once proud silhouette of the home blurred into a fiery outline against the darkness. Neighbors watched from a distance, helpless. Sirens pierced the night, and firefighters rushed to the scene, but the fire was relentless. It had taken hold of the mansion with a grip too strong to loosen. Each room, once filled with life and memory, was engulfed in a wave of heat and light. Within minutes, ceilings collapsed, walls crumbled, and windows shattered, the sound of breaking glass carried on the night air like a haunting refrain. This was not the slow unraveling of a place that time had forgotten. It was swift, merciless, and complete. The fire moved through hallways that had once carried footsteps of celebration and quiet reflection alike. It consumed staircases polished by generations, and it reduced treasured corners to ash. The home's strength, its very grandeur, seemed to fuel the blaze, providing more for the flames to consume. By the time the fire began to weaken, the mansion had been stripped of its former presence. What had once stood tall, a proud symbol of endurance and community, was now little more than charred beams and smoldering rubble. The roof, once a crown to the structure, had fallen inward. The walls, once protective and unyielding, had been blackened beyond recognition. The house was gone, not through gradual decay but in one night of devastation. And yet, even in destruction, the mansion spoke. The flames revealed how fragile history can be, how quickly what feels permanent can vanish. For the community, the loss was not only of wood and stone but of a gathering place of memory. People who had celebrated inside those walls, who had looked upon the mansion with pride, now faced the sight of smoke rising where history had once stood. The speed of the fire left little chance for anything to be saved. There was no time to rescue keepsakes or carry away symbols of the past. In its rush, the fire stripped everything bare, leaving behind only silence and disbelief. The mansion, which had withstood decades, surrendered to the flames in a single night. The image of its destruction lingered long after the fire was gone. For those who saw it, the memory was etched deeply, a reminder that permanence is often an illusion. What once felt immovable had been brought down in hours. And yet, in that loss, the community found itself reflecting not just on what was gone, but on what could never be taken, the legacy, the meaning, and the resilience that the mansion had represented. The mansion may have been reduced to ash, but the story of its life and its sudden end became part of something larger. The fire, swift and consuming, could burn down walls, but it could not silence the memories within them. In the smoke and embers, a new chapter began, one where the community carried the story forward, ensuring that even though the structure was gone, the spirit it embodied would endure. In the quiet aftermath of the blaze, when the smoke had thinned and the last embers smoldered in silence, the question on everyone's mind was the same: what happened? The mansion, with all its history and weight, was gone, but the mystery of how the fire began hung in the air like a shadow that refused to fade. Authorities arrived quickly, cordoning off the site, moving carefully through the wreckage that only hours before had been a vibrant landmark. Yet, despite the urgency of the moment, no one could give an answer. Whispers began almost immediately. Some said it was the wind, an unpredictable spark carried from elsewhere that ignited the structure. Others thought about faulty wiring, or the possibility of neglected maintenance in such an old building. But there were also those who wondered aloud if there might be more to the story, if the destruction of such a powerful symbol could really be explained so simply. The uncertainty fueled the conversation, each person adding their own theory, each one searching for something that might make sense of what felt senseless. For the investigators, the challenge was monumental. Fires move fast, erasing their own footprints as they spread. What begins as a small spark can grow into a sweeping inferno within minutes, consuming not only the structure but also the evidence of its own origins. By the time the flames had been subdued, so much of the mansion had been reduced to ash that identifying a single cause felt like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Still, the work had to continue. Specialists combed through the ruins with measured steps, their flashlights cutting through the haze of dust and soot. Every beam, every stone fragment was studied as though it might hold the answer. They gathered samples, examined burn patterns, and noted the way the fire had traveled from room to room. Each detail was recorded, yet none provided the clarity that people craved. And so the official word remained: investigations are ongoing. In the absence of confirmation, the uncertainty carried its own weight. For the community, not knowing was almost as painful as the loss itself. The mansion was more than a home, it was a vessel of legacy. To see it vanish so suddenly, without explanation, left many with a hollow feeling, as though the past itself had been interrupted. The unanswered questions turned into long conversations around dinner tables and quiet debates among neighbors. And while investigators pursued the science of the fire, the people pursued meaning. They asked what it meant that such a landmark could vanish without warning. They questioned how much protection history truly had in the modern world. For many, the lack of answers felt like a reminder of how fragile their own stories were, how quickly they could be altered by forces beyond their control. Still, there was patience. The community understood that truth takes time. Fires are tricky, and answers don't always come overnight. What mattered most was that someone was asking the questions, someone was searching for the truth, and that the memory of the mansion would not be allowed to fade into silence. Days turned into weeks, and though official reports remained scarce, the commitment to uncovering the truth did not waver. Authorities reassured the public that every lead was being followed, every piece of evidence scrutinized. The work might be slow, but it was deliberate, careful, and necessary. And so the story of the mansion became twofold, one part about loss, the other about pursuit. The fire had taken much, but it also ignited a new determination, a drive to understand, to learn, to bring closure not just to the ruins of a building, but to the hearts of those who saw it as a piece of themselves. Whether the answer lies in an electrical spark, a natural accident, or something yet unseen, one thing remains clear: the story is not finished. The mansion may be gone, but the search for the truth continues, carrying forward the same resilience that the community itself has always embodied. For the people of Altadena, the mansion was never just a house. Its towering presence on the hillside was a reminder of what was possible, a structure that carried within its walls the echoes of ambition, perseverance, and triumph. To the black residents of the community, it symbolized a chapter of history that was often overlooked, a story of success carved out in the face of barriers. When the fire reduced it to ash, it wasn't only the physical structure that disappeared. It was as if a piece of the community's shared identity had been pulled away. Families who had lived in Altadena for generations spoke of the mansion as though it were part of their own lineage. Parents would point to its grand facade while driving past, telling their children about the significance of its history. Elders remembered community gatherings where the mansion was a backdrop to celebrations of unity and progress. For younger generations, the building stood as proof that their heritage held not just struggle but also greatness. Its destruction, then, was felt like a personal wound. The sense of loss spread quickly, not just as news but as an ache that touched every conversation. Neighbors met on sidewalks and in small community spaces, speaking in hushed voices about what had been lost. Some spoke of the memories tied to it, stories of weddings, reunions, and moments when the mansion had served as a quiet source of pride. Others reflected on what it represented symbolically, a beacon of black achievement in a world that too often sought to diminish such accomplishments. What made the loss especially profound was that the mansion was not merely admired from a distance. It had been woven into the cultural fabric of Altadena. It served as a landmark of belonging, a physical affirmation that the community's legacy was rooted, visible, and enduring. Now, standing in front of the blackened remains, residents described the silence as heavy, as though the ground itself carried the weight of absence. For many, the fire's destruction awakened a flood of emotions. There was grief, of course, but also frustration and reflection. The mansion's fall became a reminder of how vulnerable history can be. A single night had undone decades of preservation, and the community was left asking how much of their cultural memory could truly be protected. It was not just about the walls that had collapsed, it was about the heritage that could not be rebuilt with bricks and mortar. Community leaders stepped forward to give voice to these feelings. They spoke of resilience, of carrying forward the stories the mansion once embodied. They urged residents to see beyond the ashes, to recognize that while a structure may be lost, the spirit it represented lived on in the people who remembered it. Yet even with these reassurances, the loss weighed heavily. For a neighborhood that had long relied on symbols of perseverance, the absence of such a landmark felt like a void too wide to easily bridge. Children, who once gazed up at the mansion with wide eyes, now looked upon ruins. Their parents and grandparents worked to explain its significance, emphasizing that the fire could not erase what it had stood for. In living rooms and classrooms, stories were retold with even greater urgency, about how the mansion had come to be, about what it meant, and about why its legacy must endure even if the building itself could not. In the end, the fire did more than destroy a structure, it sparked a moment of reckoning. It forced the people of Altadena to confront how fragile their cultural anchors could be, and it reminded them of the importance of memory and storytelling. The mansion was gone, but its meaning was not. The black residents of Altadena carried that meaning within themselves, promising that the flames which had consumed the house would not consume the legacy. What remained was a collective vow, to honor the past, to safeguard the stories, and to ensure that no fire, however fierce, could erase their place in history. In the days following the fire, Altadena seemed quieter than usual. The streets still carried the smell of smoke, and the distant outline of the mansion's remains loomed as a stark reminder of what had been lost. Yet the silence was not empty, it was heavy with sorrow. Community members, young and old, spoke of the devastation not just as the loss of a building but as the loss of a safeguard, a vessel that had held their collective history. For many residents, grief came in waves. Elders who had lived long enough to see Altadena grow and change wept openly, remembering the days when the mansion was a gathering point, a place that brought dignity to a community too often overlooked. They recalled afternoons when children played in its shadow, when families paused to take photographs near its gates, as if simply standing close connected them to something greater than themselves. Those images were not just snapshots of people, they were records of belonging, evidence that their history had a home. Parents tried to explain the loss to their children, struggling to find the right words. How do you tell a child that a fire had not only taken away a house but also erased part of the story that affirmed who they were? Some families turned to storytelling in response. They gathered in living rooms, recounting the mansion's origins, its significance, and the many lives it had touched. Each tale carried the mansion back into existence, if only in memory, keeping it alive in the hearts of those who had loved it. Community meetings became places of shared mourning. People stood up one by one, speaking through tears about what the mansion had meant. Some remembered visiting during cultural events, others recalled looking up at its grandeur as teenagers and feeling inspired. One resident described it as a mirror, reflecting back a truth that was often denied, that their community had roots of resilience and wealth of culture, that they belonged to a story larger than struggle alone. The grief was not only personal, it was deeply collective. For Altadena's black residents, the mansion represented continuity, a link between past, present, and future. Its walls had borne witness to decades of resilience, holding the intangible threads of culture and identity that were often threatened by erasure elsewhere. To lose it so suddenly felt like watching a bridge collapse, leaving generations stranded on separate sides. Yet amid the sorrow, there was also a recognition of responsibility. Many residents spoke not only of what was gone but of what must be preserved. They knew that the fire could consume wood and stone, but it could not extinguish the stories. If anything, the loss made those stories more precious, more urgent to share. Elders urged younger generations to hold tight to the memories, to write them down, to speak them aloud, so that the mansion's spirit would not fade with the smoke. At candlelight vigils, people gathered to mourn together. Standing in the glow of flickering flames, they prayed, sang, and reflected. The scene was both solemn and defiant, a reminder that grief can also be an act of remembrance, a way of refusing to let history vanish. The vigils became more than ceremonies, they were affirmations that the mansion's importance had not died with the fire. In every conversation, one truth became clear: this was not only about a house. It was about identity, about continuity, about pride and a legacy that stretched far beyond Altadena's borders. The mansion had been a vessel for all of that, and while the fire had taken its physical form, it could not take its meaning. And so, even in their grief, the community made a vow. They would honor what had been lost by carrying it forward. They would ensure that the mansion's story, its grandeur, its significance, and the lives it had touched, would remain etched in their collective memory. For if history is preserved in the hearts of people, then no fire, however fierce, can truly destroy it. As the ashes of the mansion cooled and investigators continued their work, conversations in Altadena began to take a deeper turn. People weren't only grieving the loss of one home, they were voicing something larger, something that had echoed across generations. Some community members began to speak about a pattern they knew all too well: the slow and recurring disappearance of spaces that had been vital to Black life, whether through sudden tragedy or years of neglect. In living rooms, coffee shops, and church basements, these discussions carried a mix of sorrow and determination. Elders recounted how they had watched cherished landmarks vanish over time. A once thriving business district was reduced to a handful of shops. A community center that had been a hub for music, art, and cultural pride fell into disrepair after funding was withdrawn. And now, the mansion, one of the most visible reminders of accomplishment and resilience, was gone in a matter of hours. People asked difficult questions. Why was it that certain spaces seemed more vulnerable than others? Why did the very places that carried history and pride so often find themselves at risk of being erased? The answers were not simple, but the feelings were clear. Losing such spaces wasn't just about buildings or physical landmarks. It was about identity, recognition, and continuity. Each disappearance felt like a page torn from a book, leaving the story incomplete. For younger generations, the loss of the mansion became a lesson in both grief and awareness. They listened as grandparents and parents explained that this fire was part of a broader narrative that stretched far beyond Altadena. Similar stories had played out in other towns and cities, communities seeing their cultural landmarks disappear, their histories left vulnerable. This understanding sparked a new sense of urgency. Many young people expressed a determination not to let the cycle repeat unchecked. Community leaders began to frame the mansion's destruction as more than an isolated tragedy. In speeches and meetings, they connected it to a broader challenge: the preservation of Black heritage in the face of fragility and loss. They spoke about the importance of documentation, of recording oral histories, of fighting for recognition and protection of spaces that held meaning. It was not just about honoring what had been lost, but about ensuring that what remained would not meet the same fate. Some recalled moments in history when whole neighborhoods had been reshaped, dismantled, or left to crumble without support. They spoke with frustration but also with resolve. The fire had awakened a collective voice, one that insisted the community's spaces and stories could no longer be treated as expendable. At public gatherings, residents articulated their concerns with a clarity that carried both pain and conviction. They reminded each other that every time a space was lost, there was a danger that future generations might never know the richness of their past. They feared that without vigilance, children might grow up without tangible connections to the triumphs and struggles of those who came before them. And yet, woven into these concerns was a call to action. If loss was recurring, then preservation must become recurring too. People began to organize, discussing initiatives to create digital archives, to push for heritage protection, to invest in the care of remaining cultural landmarks. The mansion's absence had created a void, but it also stirred a sense of responsibility to fill that void with something enduring. What emerged was more than grief, it was an awakening. The community began to see the fire not only as an end but as a signal, a reminder that their cultural spaces must be defended, nurtured, and remembered with urgency. Some voiced their concerns with trembling voices, others with fiery determination, but all with the same understanding: if these spaces kept disappearing, so too would the stories that gave them meaning. In this way, the fire became more than a tragedy. It became a mirror, reflecting the vulnerability of history but also the strength of a community determined to hold on to its legacy. The voices that rose from Altadena carried both sorrow and defiance, ensuring that the memory of what was lost would fuel the preservation of what still remained. In the weeks after the fire, when the last embers had been extinguished and the ruins stood like a hollowed-out shell of memory, Altadena's community began to shift from mourning toward action. The grief was still fresh, but so was the determination to make sure the mansion's story did not vanish into silence. Local organizations, activists, and cultural leaders came together, gathering in community halls, church sanctuaries, and even virtual meetings to discuss how best to preserve what had been lost and honor what the mansion had represented. The conversations were filled with both sorrow and vision. Many people spoke of the mansion as if it were a living being, an ancestor whose voice still needed to be heard. It wasn't enough, they said, to simply remember. Memory needed to be transformed into action, into something that would last. And so, ideas began to take shape. Some proposed building a memorial at the site, a place where future generations could stand and feel connected to the history that had once lived behind those walls. Others imagined an archive of photographs, oral histories, and documents that could keep the story alive long after the ashes had faded. Leaders from local cultural centers stepped forward, offering their spaces as homes for exhibits and storytelling events. They envisioned rooms filled with portraits of the mansion, testimonies from residents who had known its grandeur, and artistic tributes inspired by its spirit. For them, preserving the story meant more than collecting facts, it meant creating an experience that would allow visitors to step into the emotional weight of what the mansion had symbolized. There were also discussions about education. Teachers and community organizers wanted the mansion's story to be woven into local school curriculums, ensuring that children grew up with a sense of connection to their own history. It wasn't just about teaching dates or events, but about instilling pride, resilience, and continuity. They hoped students could visit exhibits, hear from elders, and even create their own projects that celebrated the mansion's legacy. In this way, the fire would not mark an end but rather the beginning of a new chapter of awareness. Artists, too, joined the movement. Musicians spoke of composing pieces dedicated to the mansion's memory. Visual artists sketched murals that could bring its image back to life on city walls. Writers drafted poetry and stories that captured its essence. For them, art became a vessel of preservation, a way to keep the mansion not only remembered but continually reimagined in living culture. At the same time, leaders recognized the importance of official recognition. They began to explore avenues to petition for historical landmark status, even if the building itself no longer stood. They knew that designations like this could open doors to funding, protection, and broader awareness. Such recognition would declare to the wider world that the mansion's story mattered, that it was not just a local loss but part of a larger cultural narrative. Amid all these plans, one theme remained constant: the community wanted to transform loss into legacy. They refused to let the mansion's story fade into whispers. Every meeting, every proposal carried the same underlying conviction, that the mansion had stood as a beacon of resilience, and now, even in its absence, it must continue to inspire. These conversations sparked hope, even in the midst of sorrow. They showed that while fire could destroy walls and timbers, it could not destroy meaning. By preserving the story through memorials, education, art, and recognition, the community was writing a new chapter, one where the mansion's legacy would live on in ways that were perhaps even more powerful than before. In the end, what was lost physically began to be reborn in spirit. The mansion's memory was no longer confined to a single structure on a hill. It was being carried into classrooms, galleries, community centers, and the hearts of all who heard its story. Through the efforts of local organizations and leaders, Altadena was ensuring that the mansion's voice would never be silenced, and that its history would continue to illuminate the path forward. As the story of the mansion's loss ripples through Altadena and beyond, it becomes clear that this is not just about one house, or even one community. It is a reminder of broader truths that have echoed across time, that Black history is often carried in fragile vessels, that resilience has always been at the heart of survival, and that cultural landmarks must be protected if they are to continue inspiring future generations. The mansion stood as a physical testament to what was possible in the face of difficulty, and even in its absence, it continues to speak. Its charred remains are not only a sight of sorrow but also a call to action, urging us all to pay attention, to honor, and to preserve. The fire has underscored how delicate these touchstones of heritage can be. A single night, a single spark, can erase decades of memory housed within stone and wood. Yet history shows that while buildings may fall, the spirit they carry can endure if communities choose to nurture it. The mansion's story is now written into the hearts of those who remember it, into the voices of elders who pass it on, and into the hands of young people determined to keep it alive. In that sense, the fire did not silence the mansion, it amplified its meaning, making it clear how vital such spaces are. Resilience, after all, is not simply about withstanding loss. It is about transforming that loss into something enduring, something that can guide the path forward. The mansion may no longer tower over Altadena's hills, but its story now stands taller than ever. It is a story of achievement, of belonging, and of a community that refuses to let its heritage slip away. Preserving such legacies is not only about safeguarding the past, it is about shaping the future, giving the next generation roots strong enough to withstand whatever storms may come. And so, as this chapter comes to a close, the mansion's memory lingers as both a lesson and an invitation. It invites us to recognize the value of cultural landmarks, to see them not merely as buildings but as vessels of identity and hope. It challenges us to be vigilant in protecting them, to honor them while they stand, and to carry them forward when they fall. Most importantly, it calls us to remember that resilience is not born in moments of comfort, but in the ability to rise after loss and turn sorrow into legacy. Thank you for joining this story, for reflecting on its meaning, and for helping keep history alive. If this journey moved you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, so that together, we can continue uncovering and preserving stories that matter. Wishing you peace, rest, and a good night.